My brand new book, Midwife Pip's Guide to a Positive Birth, is now available. So much more than a book, this is a guide that allows me to hold your hand through your birth preparation journey. With over a decade of experience and knowledge packed in to ensure you really are empowered in the way you deserve to achieve a positive birth, regardless of the twists and turns that crop up. Make sure that you get your hands on Midwife Pip's Guide to a Positive Birth book now and are empowered to have the birth experience that you deserve. Hello, I'm Pip, and welcome to the Midwife Pip podcast, the home of expert information and real chats on all things pregnancy, birth, and beyond. One of the most debilitating and under-supported areas of pregnancy has to be hyperemesis. For those who suffer this extreme, long-lasting form of pregnancy sickness, it is a real struggle, and support and management strategies are essential to prevent it leading to more adverse complications. I'm really excited to be joined by this week's guest, Lindsay Salmon. Lindsay is the Community and Engagement Manager at Pregnancy Sickness Support, the only charity in the UK providing support to those suffering from nausea and vomiting in pregnancy and Hyperemesis Gravidarum. As a survivor of 2 hyperemesis pregnancies, Lindsay knows firsthand how debilitating and miserable the condition can be, and she is passionate about raising awareness and improving the care for sufferers. So welcome, Lindsay, and thank you for coming on to join us because we need you in the world of pregnancy.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh my goodness, you have had 2 pregnancies with hyperemesis. So with both the support you do for women and your own experiences, can you tell us what exactly it is?
So my experiences were a little while ago now. So my hyperemesis babies are now 13 and nearly 9. But it's such a horrendous condition. Actually, it really stays with you. So I do vividly remember the pregnancies that I had. And basically, hyperemesis is excessive vomiting in pregnancy. And for me, it started like I was hit by a sledgehammer. It woke me up in the middle of the night and I started vomiting and I didn't stop. And every time I moved, I was sick. Every time I got a breath of air from somewhere, I was sick. Every time I thought about food, I was sick. And it's really difficult to describe the level of nausea and how excruciating that is, because it feels like it fills up every single space in your body, in your head, in your thoughts. There's no room for anything else. And it was absolutely constant. So it didn't get any reprieve, really. Even the vomiting didn't really give a sense of relief. It just, I don't know, it was just a kind of continuous thing. So in my naivety at that point, I thought, well, this is just pregnancy sickness, morning sickness, as I really never use the term now, but I used to. I thought it was just that. And like lots of women, just kind of plowed on, thought, well, it's going to get better. It'll be fine. I'll get to 12 weeks. And I crawled my way to the end of term because I was a teacher at the time and had to tell my colleagues I was pregnant because I was so worried they'd think I had something contagious.
Yeah.
So I had to explain, the reason I'm so sick is because I'm pregnant. You're not going to catch it. So that was way earlier than I planned to tell anybody. I had wanted to do the big reveal, but there was no option to do that either time because I was
revealing with your trips to the toilet.
Yeah, exactly. And I had to plan my route to the staff room based on where the toilets were. So there was a toilet quite close to my office. So I would make it there and then I'd retch and I'd maybe be sick. And then I'd be like, okay, cool, I can get to the next one. And then I'd literally waddle down the corridor because I felt so awful. I couldn't really run to the next toilet. And then be sick in there. And then I would go the last hall to the staff room, which was another leg of the journey. And there was a toilet right next door. So I'd make it there. So I did that for a week. And then it was the summer holidays, thankfully. But I basically spent most of the summer holidays in hospital. So I would go in and I'd be so ill by the time I got there. I couldn't keep anything down for days. And back in those days, ketones were the basic measure of how ill you were. And every time I had 4 pluses of ketones in my urine and they would admit me for 5 days and I'd have fluids and I would feel no better. and I'd have antiemetics and I would feel no better. And I just remember being cold all the time. You know what maternity wards are like. They're so boiling, and I'd be shivering in my bed because I was so depleted. It was awful. So it never really got better, actually, the first time around. The meds took the edge off, and I started something at about 14 weeks on Danzatron, which switched off the vomiting for me. But the nausea was still there. And I then went back to work at about 24 weeks probably, and did reduced timetable, couldn't get up early, still probably needed a day off a week. It was brutal. And I think through all of that, my mental health really suffered, but I didn't recognize it. I just I remember reading like, what is depression when I was pregnant, and saying to my husband, like, I have that. All of those things I have, like the not looking forward to anything, the feeling joyless, like, you know, just being low mood, all that. It's like, yeah, but you're ill, you know, it's bound to happen. And actually, with hindsight, I think I probably was depressed. And then when the baby arrived, it was like, oh, well, that's the end of that then. Yay.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about the baby bit. So actually, my entrance into motherhood was pretty rough. And I struggled afterwards. Baby wasn't very well. So we ended up in hospital for longer, and I wanted a home birth. And so everything just didn't go the way I expected it to. And I think sometimes it's that conflict of expectations versus reality that can make things really, really hard for women, especially when Instagram and you know, social media is showing this joyful, everyone's, you know, glowing and wearing beautiful clothes and the hair's gorgeous, and literally haven't looked worse. I was grey, spots, couldn't wash my hair for weeks and weeks and weeks, so I looked gorgeous, as you can imagine. And it just was entirely the opposite of what I'd expected. And that can be a really difficult place for women to be when it's supposed to be the best time of your life, and it's actually the worst.
Yeah. And I think as well, Lindsay, when we think about pregnancy and sickness, like you did in your first pregnancy, when you were like, well, everyone gets sick in pregnancy, right? Like, this is just really normal. Do you feel like that means that women aren't recognized? Because, you know, you can speak to someone who has had pregnancy sickness that, yes, has been really tough, but is not the scale that is hyperemesis, and kind of feel like you're not fully understood, because I don't think, and, you know, you've had awful journeys, and I just don't think you can really understand it unless you've been in those shoes. My first pregnancy, I had bad sickness, probably verging on hyperemesis, but it was managed as with hospital outpatient appointments and that kind of thing. I didn't have to be like in bed for a week, and it went. So I can empathize to an extent on how bad I felt then. And I remember thinking, geez, if I have to do this for 40 weeks, I actually don't know if I can continue with a pregnancy for 40 weeks feeling like this, like awful. But to have that constantly, day and night, right? Because you wake up in the night and because you've moved or you've been a bit too flat and then you're sick, constantly throughout your pregnancy, when, like you say, society makes you feel like you should be so grateful because you're pregnant, and you know that you're really pleased you're pregnant. You know that for lots of people that's not achievable, or it's a really difficult journey. So you're so grateful, but at the same time, you can absolutely hate feeling so unwell and so sick. And then that guilt, right? Because we know that pregnancy is such a great time to be nourishing our babies and eating spinach, and you're like, I can't even eat a dry cracker, let alone vegetables. How did you cope with that? That's really hard to do for 40 weeks.
Yeah, it is really hard. And I think in my first pregnancy, and with lots of women that we speak to on the helpline that come through to the charity, they're very much told it'll get better at 12 weeks. So you kind of hang on to that. You're like, I'm going to get there. It's going to be okay. And then I'll wake up on the first day of my 13th week, and I'll be
glowing.
And then I went for my second scan, because I had an early scan because I was so unwell. Went for my 12-week scan, and it turned out it was actually 13 weeks and a bit. And I was so gutted.
Oh, yeah.
I just thought, well, if that's the case, then this is not gone. But it's okay, because 16 weeks and you'll be better. So then you hold on to 16 weeks. And actually, it's really difficult. And I think it's really unhelpful. Both of those things are really unhelpful. The idea that you've got to put up with this for 40 weeks is an unhelpful thought, because that's a really long time.
A really long time,
looking at the top of a mountain and going, I've got to get there. I'm never going to get there, because you can't. You know, it's a huge challenge. And also the false hope of it'll go by 12 weeks, it'll go by 16 weeks, by 20 weeks, fine. And I actually had a midwife say to me when I had to be admitted at 41 weeks because I was so unwell because I'd run out of meds. And she said to me, but you shouldn't be being sick anymore. You should be fine. I was like, but I'm not. So
I'd love to be feeling fine.
Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say. So I think that the way I managed it in my second pregnancy, knowing a lot more, being a volunteer for the charity already, and understanding that it's not going at 12 weeks or 16 weeks or possibly 20 weeks, it might be the long haul. I think it made it easier to focus on the next thing, the next mini milestone, whether that was the next midwife appointment, the next GP appointment. I had an amazing GP in my second pregnancy, and I just used to book in to see her every couple of weeks back in the day when you could do that. And we'd sit down and chat about how are the meds working? Do we need to change anything? How are you getting on? And I would just work towards that. But actually, sometimes you need to bring it in even closer to the next medication that you're going to take in the day. So within the next couple of hours, you know, the next meal, although looking forward to meals isn't a thing, but, you know, the next visitor you have, it's kind of really bringing it right down, because otherwise it's completely overwhelming. Yeah. And you're right, you know, lots of women really struggle with the idea that they should hate that word, should be joyful and grateful. And actually, a lot of women say they feel like they're dying. No one's grateful for feeling like that. It's awful. Whilst we know that there's a baby in there, those early stages of pregnancy, you don't feel pregnant, really, do you? Beyond feeling a bit nauseous in you know, talking about normal sort of situations, you might feel a bit queasy, boobs might hurt a bit. Beyond that, there's no real symptoms. There's no real
feeling a baby kick or seeing a bump, or
there's no bump there. It was practically concave. So I think the idea that you at that point are so connected to that bit, you're so grateful to it, is a myth, really, because I don't think there's many people would say that they feel super connected at that point. I think the challenge for women with hyperemesis is that later on it can be quite difficult to connect, because the thing that's making you so unwell, and the research shows that it's actually the GDF15 hormone that's produced by the fetus that is causing the sickness. It's difficult to be grateful for that creature that is growing within you, and so it can be really difficult to connect. But I think really focusing on like one step at a time, the next mini milestone that you can get to, can help with that.
That's really nice practical advice for anyone listening that is in the depths, Lindsay. How common is hyperemesis? Because I think it's really important that we completely separate, in a way, normal, and I'm doing this with my fingers because I know pregnancy sickness has such a spectrum, but I think there's an element of what's normal, what's still within the realms of healthy, can get on with day to day, and then when we step into hyperemesis, which is a very abnormal thing that requires treatment, support, medication, right? That's not a muddle through job. How common is the hyperemesis, if we carve that out?
Yeah, and I think that's really useful, Pip, to sort of separate those two things out, because I almost feel like they are two completely separate entities. And for hyperemesis, between 1% and 3% of women suffer with hyperemesis. So if you look at the UK alone, that's around 30,000 pregnancies a year that are affected by it. So it's not nothing, but it is still quite a small number. When you think that around 70 to 80% of pregnancies generally are affected by nausea, vomiting in pregnancy. So and the normal range, I think that what you've described there around you can do normal things, get on with your day, that's where it becomes difficult. So when the vomiting and the nausea becomes more than you can manage, so either that it's so severe that you can't work, you can't look after your children, you can't get out of bed, you can't wash yourself, probably a sign that it's not normal. So it often isn't about the number of times you're sick, it's about how debilitating it is. And there is quite a clear definition of hyperemesis now, which was only kind of agreed back in 2021. But it involves that extra step. It's not just about severe nausea and or vomiting, how well you can eat or drink, and also whether it has to start in early pregnancy, otherwise it's clearly something else. But it's this idea that you can't do things that you normally do. You can't go out for and see friends. You can't walk the dog. And actually for many women, it is being completely bedbound. And so the normal, you can have quite severe nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, and it can be managed for you to still be able to do normal things. And that sort of still sits under normal. But then when it edges into actually you can't do anything, you can't do things that you normally do, then that's when it sort of becomes more like hyperemesis. And then, yes, you're right. Treatment is absolutely necessary. It's a medical condition, and no amount of ginger, by the way, is going to fix it. I just thought I'd throw that in there. And muddling through isn't an option, because actually your health is at risk.
Dangerous. Yeah, definitely. That totally resonates. I remember in my first pregnancy really trying to be like, I work with pregnant women all the time. I need to be brave, like I'm being sick, but this is pregnancy. And I remember phoning my GP eventually, and she was like, so what have you eaten this week? And I was like, think about half a jam donut. And she was like, all week. I was like, well, yeah, I can't even go near food. Whereas this pregnancy, I was sick for longer, much less severe. It just went on a bit longer. And actually what I could do was eat constantly, loads of food. So actually I could really get on with normal stuff as long as there was a nice bun and some toast in my hand the whole time. So it was really, really different, which was strange.
Yeah, and I think that highlights the spectrum idea of the condition, because it is a spectrum. And some people, my mother-in-law, for example, never had a day of nausea throughout 3 pregnancies. And I think, wow, that's incredible.
So unfair.
That's so unfair. Whereas then you have people like yourself who have probably sort of fairly severe vomiting for a short period of time, less severe vomiting for a longer period of time, but actually the things that you can adjust, your lifestyle, your diet adjustments, make a massive difference. And I think a lot of women with hyperemesis, they start off with not being able to touch food, not being able to think about food. It's just so unbelievable how the brain works, because just thinking about food is enough to make you vomit. It's crazy, but that is the reality for lots of women. So they have these food aversions, which mean early on they'll lose a lot of weight. So I think I lost 1.5 stones in 2 weeks. That's a fairly brutal weight loss program. But by the end of my pregnancy, I had put on 4 stone. Because all I could do, once the vomiting stopped and the medication managed those food aversions, because that is another benefit of some of the antiemetics, that they can reduce down those food aversions, it meant that I just had to eat all of the time. So one of my favorites on the way to work, I'd stop at a well-known supermarket and I would get their butterscotch and pecan yum yum every day. So we're talking some serious calories going on here. So
that was me in my first trimester this time, to be fair. Whole pack of ice buns, done.
That's it. And
good snack.
It's those carb-tastic things that really are often what we can tolerate. And it's interesting in hyperemesis pregnancies, where sometimes it's quite strong flavors that women can tolerate, whereas you'd think it would be very bland foods, but actually that sort of leaves too much room for interpretation. You need something that's really strong, like, sort of really salt vinegary type things.
Salt and vinegar crisps.
Oh, the best, aren't they?
Yeah.
Do it. You've got to do it. But yeah, it's so different, and how you manage it is very different. Some women never really get back to eating, and even postnatally they struggle to sort of get their weight back up again, because food becomes the enemy.
And it's an association often, isn't it? I remember having food poisoning as a child after a Chinese takeaway, and I didn't eat Chinese takeaways for years, because it's that association with food and a feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think everybody has some kind of association with sickness. So, for example, for me, it was cheese on toast. Don't know why. Just had it one night, and then I was ill that night, completely unrelated. But for me, that was the connection.
That was a connection.
Yeah, and I still, from my pregnancies, I still can't drink tea, and I still can't drink any sort of diluting juice, because that was something that got me through those pregnancies. But now that's just a reminder of them.
How you felt.
Me.
Oh. And so I know we just sort of alluded to this. Do we know why some women are massively impacted with hyperemesis, like yourself, Lindsay, and others have absolutely no nausea? I remember messaging a friend of mine who's got 6 children in my first pregnancy saying, how have you done this 6 times? Like, tell me. And she was like, because I felt normal. I was like, what? How is that fair? Why does that happen?
No, it's not fair at all. And actually, until last December, we didn't know, which was really weird, because, I do lots of training for healthcare professionals. And one of the things that comes up every single time is, well, why? What causes it? And they have identified, they being these amazing researchers at Cambridge University and also in the States, have identified that there is a hormone called GDF15, and it is produced by the fetus during pregnancy, in every pregnancy. But also GDF15 exists in our systems anyway. Like a hormone, we produce it, it's there. And for women who suffer with hyperemesis, they have a very rare mutation of the gene, which means that they have very, very low levels of it ordinarily. So my levels of it now are like very low compared to yours, for example. And so when they fall pregnant and the baby produces these high levels of GDF15, their body goes, whoop, can't cope. And it causes them to vomit because it acts on the nausea, vomiting and appetite area of the brain. So I have explained that in very, very simplistic terms. Professor Sir Stephen O'Reilly at Cambridge University can explain it much better than I can. But that is essentially what it is. So they thought for years that it's hormone related, but the discussion was always around the HCG hormone and things. But in lots of ways, it makes sense that it's something different because women often share that they started to feel sick before they even got a positive pregnancy test. So then that doesn't really follow with it being the HCG hormone having anything to do with it because that's
not high enough, right?
Yeah, it's not high enough. But actually women are sick before that. So the GDF15 obviously has peaked. So they're already looking into treatment options and possibilities of cures and things because it's so clear it's this thing. So, I mean, it's very exciting for those of us in our community because there is an increased risk for our children. And I've got 2 girls. So there's a good chance that one of them's already decided she's not having children, that's the end. Like she's 9. She's like, yeah, I'm not. I feel like
that's a healthy idea at 9, to be fair.
I am fostering that. I think that's great. Whereas the other one's like, yeah, I'm going to have that sort of 13-year-old innocence.
I'm going to have 10 babies.
Oh, yeah, great. I'm like, cool. Yeah, awesome. But there is an increased risk for them. So it's reassuring that there is research going on that could potentially, by the time they are thinking about having children in 20 years' time, hopefully longer, that there will be really good options in terms of identification that this GDF15 is low and also treatments, cures beyond just antiemetics that manage the symptoms to a degree.
Which is, I think, one of the most exciting things to come out of pregnancy research this decade, because it could literally change lives and also families' lives, right? Because for a lot of women, they may have wanted 3-4 children, but actually the thing that stops them is hyperemesis, because how do you physically care for other children and sustain a job, which you need to keep a roof over your family's head, when you literally are bedbound for 40 weeks? And the impact that has, I know people that listen to me talk know that I love pelvic health. And my goodness, my pelvic floor was not a big fan of the vomiting. And then I got COVID, so the vomiting and the coughing in early pregnancy. But actually that has a long-term impact on you forever. And then that puts you at risk as a woman in the menopause. And so it's wider than just the 40 weeks, isn't it? And like you've alluded to, that psychological impact, that bonding with your baby, the impact that then has on that child's growth and development, it's so multifactorial. I think we've often really oversimplified it as you're pregnant, it's morning sickness, it'll go. Actually, it's so much bigger than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And the impact it has on families is vast because, there's a huge financial implication. If you've got children already, then not only are you not able to look after them and you need care yourself, so you can't work, but also that means either increasing childcare. So there's a cost implication there, or the partner having to not work and pick up the slack on that, which is really hard because they're supposed to be working as well. And, all of those things are huge considerations when women are looking at having another pregnancy and potentially stepping back into hyperemesis, not just the terror of actually doing that again.
Yeah.
Because when you've been in a really, really dark place, it is absolutely the most terrifying thing in the world to sort of think, okay, I could do this again. And there are significant health implications. Like we have some women that have been told, do not do this again. You will not survive this, because it has a massive toll on their bodies. You're at risk of organ failure and heart issues. There's loads of other things that can happen. So for lots of women, it's very limiting in terms of their family size. And the psychological impact is massive and hugely underestimated. And I was slightly slightly disappointed, but we have to be realistic about the capacity of the system. But the new RCOG guidelines that came out in February, there's a much bigger focus on emotional well-being and doing, physical health and mental health and considering the bigger picture, which is great. That's very much welcomed. But I was really hoping that they might just say every woman with hyperemesis needs perinatal mental health referral.
Yeah.
And they didn't go that far because I think it might crash the system. But I do feel like the emotional impact is minimized and often not considered. And also postnatally, you've had this awful experience of pregnancy. You've gone then probably hopefully had a period of relief, maybe, or respite from it whilst you're very heavily pregnant, which, is not easy. And then you've had your baby and whatever's happened has happened, but then it's forgotten. It's like not discussed. There's no question in that 6-week check about how you are now following a very difficult pregnancy. And, the whole kind of birth trauma conversations that are happening at the moment are really, really important. And yet I feel like they're missing something by calling it birth. Yeah, by calling it birth trauma. There's very much a focus on the birth bit. And actually, I think really it's perinatal trauma. And I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but if we can say hyperemesis gravidarum, we can say perinatal. We can say, because hyperemesis is a significant factor in that, not only because it is a trauma on its own, but also because women are then going into the most vulnerable experience of their lives, incredibly depleted and already having quite a medicalized experience. And, I think that's a big reason why I wanted a home birth the first time around, because I just thought I have spent so much time in hospital. I don't want any of it. I want you all to go away. I just want to birth at home and be comfortable. And then I couldn't. But that's the way it went for me. But I just think we need to stop dismissing women's experiences and stop focusing on the idea that it lasts 9 months and that's the end, because it doesn't. I'm 13 years down the line and there's still things that I struggle with. There's the relationship with food. There's an increased risk of postnatal depression. There's those trauma triggers, and lots of women are diagnosed with PTSD and lots aren't, but have some of the traits. Yeah, exactly. So, I just think we need to take a much broader view of the impact of hyperemesis, not least physically, but also mentally.
Mentally, 100%. And also, I wonder if we zoom out when I was listening to you speak there, and I think the other members of the family. So in terms of relationships and the impact it could have on that, and in terms of partners bonding with the baby when, it's difficult for you with it inside of you because of the kind of chaos that comes with hyperemesis. And then other children. I know one of the things I was conscious of this time was whenever I was being sick, trying not to let my little one really identify the link between there's a baby in mummy's tummy and it's making mummy poorly, because then that's a really difficult thing, isn't it? When you're so worried about how this new baby's going to fit into your other family dynamic as well. So that impact that it has on everybody.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think lots of women who are considering a subsequent pregnancy with hyperemesis, you'll notice that lots of us have quite big age gaps. And that's partly because we need that time to recover in between times, and
in all aspects.
3 years to be able to think about another pregnancy without being absolutely beside myself with terror. But then I also needed my child to be a little bit independent. I couldn't have dealt with nappies, not a chance. So she had to be potty trained, able to get her own snacks, and a little bit independent. So able to watch something on the telly or play on her own for a few minutes and stuff. But she became really anxious when I was ill, understandably. And you were saying there about you trying to protect your son from seeing the vomit and things. She would need to see, because she had to check the baby wasn't in there. So she would want to see, and people would be sort of trying to take her, like, if the grandparents were here or whatever, they'd be like, oh, come with me, let's leave mummy alone for a minute. And she'd be like, no, I need to see. And it was purely that she needed to just check that nothing terrible had happened, and that the baby wasn't there. But it's a difficult.
More aware than we think, aren't they? Their little brains are so much more clever than I think often we give them recognition for.
Yeah, I mean, I would say though that she did recover from that heightened anxiety quite quickly once the baby was born. She was so in love with her baby sister. Now less so, but now there's 13, nearly 9, so it's fine. But she was so in love with this baby, and she doesn't remember. So I'll say to her now, do you remember that? And the only thing she remembers is this little pink bowl I used to carry around with me because I had to spit in it all the time. because I had excessive
Did you
saliva.
have excessive? Yeah, it's like that's just savage, isn't it? And
Oh,
it's just, the sickness isn't bad enough. Let me also make your mouth like a washing machine to
oh,
trigger it all the time.
awful. It's just so miserable. And I remember having to go back to work in my second pregnancy. I worked in a school, a different school, and I had to go back to work because I just was going slightly stir crazy at home, but also I was generally feeling okay. It's just this bowl that I had to spit in all the time. And I said to my head teacher, I was like, I can come back, but I've still got the bowl. So I cannot have any, can't work with kids directly because that's gross. And they'll just be like, what's wrong with
Why are
you?
you spitting all the time?
Yeah, because kids are like that, aren't they? And I can't really meet with parents either because, but even just being in the staff room, I could see everyone looking at me and just being really grossed out by it, which I also was really grossed out by, but I couldn't, there was nothing I could do. Eventually, I found that sipping juice like Ribena or something like that regularly, and I mean like every 25 seconds, meant that I could get through the day without spitting. But that lasted beyond pregnancy as well. I think for about a week after I had my daughter, I was still like, I feel like I need to spit. I didn't, but I felt like I had to. It was so disgusting. And there's nothing that works. Nothing helps really.
No.
And my first pregnancy, that I was on omeprazole because I had really, really bad heartburn, and they think that was connected to the tylism, but which is the official name for it.
The
But
washing machine mouth.
I think that's more accurate,
describe
to be fair. It's just awful. It's so, I mean, it's just insult to injury, frankly.
I remember being in the back of a taxi in this pregnancy. It must have been about 14 weeks. So I kind of thought I'd be okay. And anyway, taxi's taking me to the airport because I was working with an athlete and I needed to get a flight. And I had this like, you know, like the Sherpa fleece cream jumpers on. And the washing machine mouth came and I was like, just breathe, just breathe. Because it wasn't mintic all the time at this point. It was on and off. Just breathe, just breathe, just breathe. Went to open the window and I just vomited everywhere. Back of the taxi, all over myself, all over this cream Sherpa jacket I then had to carry around with me. It was just mortifying. And the man was like, are you ill? Are you ill? And I was like, no, I'm pregnant. You can't catch anything, but you're going to have to bill me for your cleaning of your taxi. Absolutely mortifying. It is embarrassing, isn't it? It's so embarrassing. And like you were saying, you then feel like you need to justify it because you think everyone thinks you're about to give them some bug or you know, catch something from you.
Yeah, it's really awful. And I think those things kind of chip away at your kind of sense of being okay. And I know lots of women struggle with leaving the house because the anxiety of what if I'm sick? What if people see me vomit? And actually, I have perfected the art of the silent vom. So I was talking to a friend yesterday. She was like, I hate being sick. I was like, meh, I've had a lot of practice. I'm kind of okay with it. Whereas, you know, you kind of go one way or the other. You either become a bit of this is whatever, it's fine. It's definitely not hyperemesis. I'm not pregnant. It's fine. Or that it brings back all of those memories.
And fear.
And then you end up with lots of women with emetophobia because the thought of being sick is just mortifying and they just can't handle it at all. But there's something very primitive about not wanting to be seen to vomit in public. I feel like that's a real kind of survival thing, that it's some sort of vulnerability that we just can't, it's unpleasant.
It is really unpleasant, which is why we need to talk about it and let people know essentially that they're not alone. Talk to us, Lindsay, about management pathways. What should that look like? So for anyone listening who is, you know, is this hyperemesis? Isn't it? What, you know, or it is, and I don't feel like I'm actually getting the help that I need. What should that look like? What's gold standard?
We would love for there to be a very clear, this is what it needs to look like. And I think it varies everywhere. It's so different. In an ideal world, women would go to their GP because typically it's going to be before they're booked with a midwife. So before 9 weeks, often it usually peaks between 9 and 13 weeks. So they're kind of in the worst of it by the time they see a midwife. So see your GP, who immediately goes, oh my goodness, I think that perhaps you might need, I think this is hyperemesis, and I think you might need some additional medical treatment. So either they prescribe an early first line medication, of which there are a variety. One licensed for use in pregnancy is called Zombia. And then hopefully the woman is not so unwell that she needs IV fluids at that point and can go home and manage that with medication. When that doesn't work, because for lots of women, one medication is not going to cut it, there's then a referral to the early pregnancy unit, which most hospitals hopefully have in their maternity services. And they would then talk about, is there a need for inpatient treatment? Can we manage this with outpatient IV fluids. There are some amazing hospitals doing wonderful things with ambulatory care where women can go in, get IV fluids, go home. One hospital I've worked with has a rehydration station.
It's better for everyone, isn't it?
It's just nobody wants to be stuck in hospital. It's miserable. And then that is an ongoing conversation about medications. There are so many different options for medications, and usually a combination works most effectively, either of first-line medications or first and second-line medications. And if that is done aggressively early on, because early intervention is better, there is some research out there that suggests the earlier you start, the better the outcome. And then you can hopefully avoid things like steroids, which are very much a third line option, but an option, especially if women are looking at terminating. And, you know, the figures, Pip, are scary about the women's thoughts about termination, because around 50% of women with hyperemesis have thoughts of terminating. And to be honest,
I'm surprised.
No, and I think
literally doesn't surprise me.
Because it's brutal, and the idea that you've got to put up with this for the next 40 weeks, and it does get better. It doesn't stay the same level of awfulness the whole way through. So I just need to say that for anyone listening going, oh my God, I'm 9 weeks.
9 weeks. And in that, like absolute trench.
Yeah, but it does get better. It's just, you don't get back to normal, I would say. Until after the baby's born. But, you know, those numbers of termination thoughts are really high, and about 10% of them go on to terminate, which if you kind of work it backwards is about 1,500 babies a year.
And that shows how that psychological input is so valuable, because my goodness, if you've got that many women that physically don't feel like they can even continue with their pregnancy because of how ill they feel, like, and then the guilt of dealing with that afterwards, like, is just
worst case scenario for everyone, I guarantee. And I've worked with women who have made that awful decision, and it's not a choice. I feel like the language around termination is so flawed. Lots of women report that they weren't told it was like a termination for medical reasons. They were told it was like social reasons, which adds another layer of shame onto it, doesn't it? But also, these women are absolutely at the end of their tether. They cannot cope. And often they're not getting the support they need. They're not getting medication that they need and could have. And so they are left with no other option. And they have to deal with the consequences of that. And it's not easy, and it's not quick. And it's definitely the worst case scenario. And there are also lots of women who have intrusive thoughts and suicidal thoughts, which, you know, that can be something that people struggle with through pregnancy anyway. But with hyperemesis, you've got so much more going on, and often that is something that they're really struggling with, and they're scared to say because they don't feel like they'll be believed, and, you know, all the repercussions of that. But actually, there are, you know, perinatal mental health teams are there to support everybody, and I am doing some work on training them up so that they understand the complexities of hyperemesis and why they might have quite a lot of women coming to them who are struggling with it, because it has a huge toll on your mental health.
Oh, Lindsay, I mean, I'm gutted for you that you had 2 pregnancies with such hyperemesis, but it's definitely led you into a path where you're, you know, making massive change for other women. So we're very grateful to you using your hideous experiences for the good moving forwards. Now, everyone that comes on the podcast, Lindsay, I ask for 3 top tips. What would yours be?
I love this question. So the 3 things, so one of them I've already mentioned, which is like, take one day at a time, focus on those mini milestones, because they will make the experience more manageable. Looking too far ahead is not going to help you. But I suppose before that even is ask for help. So don't suffer and struggle alone thinking that there's nothing that can help you, because there is. So reach out to not only medical professionals who, you know, they can refer you on. If they don't know what to do, they can refer you on. You can always ask for a second opinion. But also reach out to pregnancy sickness support, because we can provide, not only can we provide information and signposting via the helpline, but we can provide peer support. And it's so isolating when you're going through an experience that seems so alien to everybody else, and it's so not mainstream. It can feel like you're the only person in the whole world that's going through that, but I guarantee you are not. And we have volunteers throughout the country who've had similar experiences to you. Everyone who volunteers for us has had hyperemesis or nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, and they have lived experience, and they can provide ongoing emotional support throughout your entire pregnancy. And sometimes that is so valuable, just to have somebody that goes, oh my God, I get it. I remember that. That was awful. They're not going to advise you, they're not medical, but they will absolutely hear you and help you to not feel so alone. So I guess that's kind of 2 or 3 things maybe in there, but reaching out for help and not taking no for an answer.
Oh, Lindsay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And for the ongoing work that you're doing, because we say women need it. It's invaluable. And, here's to hoping that next time we connect, actually, we've got more to know about management, and we've got more options for women so that we don't have to have women suffering so much. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, but also all of that support for listeners.
Thank you so much.
Before I head off, I need to tell you something. 68% of you who listen to my show have not hit the subscribe button. So can you do me a favour? And if you've ever enjoyed listening, hit subscribe now. It makes a huge difference, helping me to keep bringing you episodes. And together, we can then reach and empower more women on this journey. If you are a pregnant or newly postpartum listener and are looking to have the healthiest, most positive and informed journey, then my exclusive Your Pregnancy and Your Postnatal Journey courses may be for you. I work with a select number of women in a bespoke way, with unlimited access to me and my expert team for the most transformative level of support at this important time in your life. We only get one shot at getting this time right. So to get in touch and find out more, head to midwifepip.com.
Hi, my name is Kay Adams, and to be honest, I'm not so good with the ageing process, so I enlisted my old chum, the filter-free Cara McKenzie, to advise.
Could you imagine being a porn star? The room would need to be really hot for me to strip off.
To be honest, she's not much help, but she is rather amusing. And along with some great guests, Jo Brand, Andy Oliver, Anton Dubeck, Ruth Langsford and Craig Revel-Horwood, darling, we are learning how to be 60. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.